Welcome back to the table. Today, Ryan and I just played Marvel Zombies, a Zombicide game. This is one that I'd actually been looking forward to, not as a Zombicide fan, but as a fan of some of Simon's more recent games, like Massive Darkness 2, like Death May Die, and I hadn't really had much experience playing Zombicide, other than a demo I did.
Oh, yeah.
Back when the original Zombicide came out, like at Gen Con one year. And this was like a long time ago. But it's been an interesting experience playing it. I played a couple tutorial scenarios, and then Ryan and I just played sort of the first of the slightly bigger scenarios.
And I've played a lot of Zombicide. I've played, all of the original seasons of Zombicide played thoroughly, and then through a lot of like the more campaign-based Zombicides like Green Horde and Black Plague. I haven't played some of the more recent Zombicides, and
like
also
the West one or the...
I haven't played the West one or the Space one.
Yeah.
This is my first Zombicide second edition game, first game that uses the second edition rules.
Oh.
There were definitely some changes from first edition to second edition that I like, some that I don't like. And then, of course, the Marvel Zombies theme brings on some new rules and additions as well.
Well, not to mention a theme that we're both very big fans of, Ryan in particular, this whole concept of Marvel. And the fact that they have these miniatures, Marvel miniatures, they've had them obviously in Marvel United. And I love the little chibi style Marvel United, but to actually have really cool Marvel miniatures in a game like this was very compelling.
I mean, they're cool. So for me, though, they kind of fall in the middle. Because you've already got Marvel United for the cool, chibi, cute little minis that you can paint. But then you've got Crisis Protocol for like the actual almost like collectible scale.
But see, both
miniatures.
Both of those games are outside of my realm of wanting to play.
Well, this is like right in the middle of those games,
exactly.
gameplay-wise too.
Exactly.
It's lighter. You don't have a rule book full of rules to memorize like you do with Crisis Protocol, or even like compared to Massive Darkness. It's not like that kind of dungeon crawl adventure.
It isn't.
This is at its core just a dice chucker. I mean, you're rolling dice left and right, getting overwhelmed by hordes and hordes of what would normally be zombies. In this case, it's SHIELD agents coming in.
And superheroes.
And superheroes coming in to bring down the agents. But I want to get this out of the way first and foremost. This is basically a one-to-one reskin of Zombicide. You've got, instead of like the bosses, you've got the superheroes. Instead of the runners, you have the special operatives. Instead of what they call the fatties, you have the guards. So it is kind of just the basic same rules, which is good for one instance if you already know how to play Zombicide. You're coming into this already ready to play. But for me, as a Zombicide fan, I was looking for a bunch of new twists, a bunch of new layers to the game to reflect the idea that you're playing zombies. And now, they did a little bit of that.
A little bit of that. What I would say, coming from my perspective, is I was wanting, like I said, my experiences with Massive Darkness 2 most recently, which I love, Death May Die, which I've loved for a much longer amount of time. And both of those games have a little bit more, some of them have a little bit more narrative. And Massive Darkness 2 has a lot more on the front of like this sort of power fantasy of collecting stuff and leveling up and all that. Now, do you level up in this game? Yes, you do. Do you collect stuff? Not.
See, that's
not quite as
the
much.
Part that hurts.
Not quite as much. And I will say, my first gut reaction to this, when I was playing the tutorials, I texted Ryan and I said, so does this feel in some ways like kind of almost like a tower defense game? Because it is just like...
Yeah, waves and waves of enemies.
All of these enemies, or these SHIELD agents and whatnot that come onto the board, really feel like a commodity. You're just putting big clumps on the board, wiping out big clumps. They're not really there long enough to like feel like, oh, I'm fighting these. Like it's just like boom, clump, get them off the board. And you are.
That is true.
The power fantasy here is going into a zone or next to a zone and just doing a massive attack to get rid of a bunch of guys. Now, I will say, there is one thing, and you can probably speak more to this, one big key mechanical element that this has that I think a lot of the other ones don't.
None of them do.
Is this hunger. Because you're playing as the zombies, there's this hunger track. At the beginning of every round, your hunger tracks go up. And if they're all the way up at 4, at any time, you become ravenous. So that limits what you can do. Because typically on your turn, you're taking 3 actions with each of the heroes in whatever order you want, but you activate a hero and do all their 3 actions. And you can open doors, you can interact with objects, attack, all those sorts of things. You have special abilities and whatnot. But when you're ravenous, you can move and you can devour. And devouring is an attack that each zombie hero has that they're going to have to use at times, because the bystanders, which at least in the first few scenarios, it's all about devouring bystanders, which are kind of unique Marvel characters in the Marvel universe that are...
It's cool. It's cool to see those characters pop up.
It is cool to see those characters around. But when you devour, you're able to lower your hunger all the way back down to 0. So you kind of have to keep that hunger track in check, which is a little bit of a more interesting puzzle.
That is interesting to me, though, because as you get hungrier, you go up, like David said, 1 to 4, you get that many dice added to your basic attacks. Yeah. So Hulk might smash, he gets to roll 3 dice, but if I'm at 3 hunger, I'm rolling 6 dice, and it still works just like Zombicide. You roll them up, you look at all your number of hits, you do that much damage, it scales. Like you could do it to the superheroes, then, whatever, goes down a list as you're doing that damage. I like it. I wish it was more granular, because you go from 0 to 4, which means you're ravenous, just very quickly.
You can pretty quickly.
It's okay, it's good to manage that, but then when you devour somebody, you drop all the way down to 0, which means now you're getting 0 to your attacks. Mm-hmm. So there is a timing element there. I wish there was more you could do with that hunger track, except there are traits. This is a new thing that they've done. Now, this is a mixed bag for me, because on one hand, the traits are cool. You can just spend an action on your turn to get a trait. It's going to give you some kind of an ability. Usually they're one-time use. You discard the trait card to do something. Now, a lot of them are kind of repeated abilities. There's some that let you use your hunger to take extra moves or extra actions or move across the board or whatever. There's a variety of different things. But they've also kind of replaced items.
Yeah, and they feel a little bit on the generic side after a while, particularly compared to, say, items. If you played Zombicide and I picked up a chainsaw, or I assume there's flamethrowers.
Yeah, like bow and arrow, flamethrower, Molotov cocktails.
With artwork and whatnot. These cards have little in the way of artwork, but they are effectively things that modify things that you're doing. Like, for instance, this feast says, when you're performing a devour, you can discard this, and it enhances those things. You can pick one of these up once per round, and you can hold up to 2 of them. So they're effectively replacing some of the abilities that you'd get from having items. Not to mention, when you devour a bystander, you get the bystander cards. And by the way, nice player boards again.
They are very nice player boards.
But you get these bystander cards, which also have sort of ongoing powers that you can use once you've devoured them.
Yeah, and it's neat. I mean, those traits are neat. Those bystanders are neat. You still level up, you still get to unlock abilities. But for example, Iron Man has Missile Wave. And I will always have Missile Wave. That's my attack. Yeah. There's no chance of me drawing a better attack or something where I flip it over and I'm like, oh, now I'm rolling 6 dice and I'm, like when you pick up the chainsaw for the first time in Zombicide. There's also nothing like the cars that you can drive in Zombicide that let you move around the board. There's no explosives. There's just not that cool element of for me, Zombicide was always about let's gear up. Let's search everything. Let's get the coolest possible gear, and then let's just kill zombies wildly. And that's the fun of Zombicide to me. While a lot of that is still here in the form of you're still using your super abilities. You're still completely wiping out massive amounts of zombies with your powers and your abilities as you level up. Taking out that item deck, I don't know how they would have done it with superheroes. Superheroes don't.
It is tricky.
They don't grab guns and explosives and swords.
I mean, to be fair, this makes the most sense. You are playing zombie heroes, so they're effectively giving you more zombie traits rather than things that you would equip yourself with.
But I wish that those would somehow just make your attacks better or just give you new, interesting ways to interact with the board. Because that was what made Zombicide so interesting for me personally. Each new item gives you new outlets for fighting zombies, new tactics, new ideas of now I have a grenade. Let's let them clump up now, because I can blow up that whole square in one go. And those kind of tactical decisions that would change as you're evolving through the game aren't really here. You're kind of always doing either devouring or your basic attack. That's really
I mean, there are some level up abilities. As you gain XP, you're going to unlock an additional action and then a couple other sort of abilities or ongoing effects. But everything that you have to discover is right here in front of you. I don't think these zombie trait cards feel that way at all. So there's not ongoing feeling of discovery like there is in some of their other games. So before I get to some of the points I want to make, who do you think this game is for necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I still find the core gameplay of Zombicide satisfying. I think one of the hits and misses that people need to know going into this is that some encounters are not going to be as fun as others.
Yeah, we've only played
So-
just really the first bare bones sort of encounter here.
Based on how an encounter goes, you could lose pretty quick. I think people really like that because it is a challenge. You're going to be possibly playing a scenario multiple times, but they're quick to set up, quick to play. None of these scenarios are probably going to push an hour, even with 4 players.
No, in fact, these in the rule book, the easy scenarios all suggest they're 25 minutes,
Yeah.
most of them. Some of them are 45 minutes. Most of them really were at max an hour, maybe a little bit more, but those were massive ones that were very hard in the back of the rule book.
Yeah, so if you're a gamer that's looking for something thematic, that a dice chucker where you're just rolling tons of dice, taking out a ton of enemies, doing those huge fights in a very short amount of time, you're still getting that character progression, you're still getting some abilities, you're still getting a challenge with some of these scenarios. I think people that enjoy those types of games are still going to really like the Marvel Zombies version. I mean, I'm still having fun with the Marvel Zombies version of this game as well, just because it is only about 30 minutes. And in that 30 minutes, you're rolling a ton of dice. Like you said,
Yeah.
you're adding a ton of guys to the board, you're taking a ton of guys away. That might feel tedious, but for some people, that's a lot of fun. Watching that board just fill up and then being able to, work together as a team and just clear that whole board. It's a very satisfying feeling.
Yeah, I agree. I've enjoyed what we played, but not so much tedious as much as it is a feeling of abstractness to pulling these things on and not really feeling the flavor of what's going on other than bunch of things, kill bunch of things. And now that brings me to sort of who I think it might not be for. And I come to this game in a unique position because I played Massive Darkness 2. I played Death May Die. Those are sort
Like
of...
Bloodborne and those other...
I haven't
more
played
heavy
those,
miniatures
but
games.
the games I've played from Simon offer different things than I think their core Zombicide does. But so when I looked at this, I kind of considered, is this going to give me some of those same sorts of things? And what they've done with those other games is provided a lot more flavor and a lot more... Well, flavor is probably the best word.
I mean, a lot more narrative.
A lot
Even
more
Darkness.
narrative to what's going on. The scenarios, even in Massive Darkness, I'll give you this: the scenarios don't have a ton of narrative, but the feeling of discovery you get in that game, also in Death May Die, where you're finding items, finding people along the way, and the narrative kind of unfolds as you play it. And in Massive Darkness 2, it's in all of the items that you're picking up, and this sort of power trip of like really leveling up your guy. You're leveling up here, but in Massive Darkness 2, you're leveling up and it's a feeling of discovery where you're like, oh, what did you get? This weapon? That is cool. Kind of like what you were saying about a little bit like the original Zombicide.
I think what it boils down to, the difference between a game like Zombicide in general and those other games, those are games about, those are games of progression and exploration. This is a game of mitigation. Like playing Zombicide is almost like that pandemic feel of like, you're constantly on the brink of getting overwhelmed. Can you survive? So you're not really making forward progress in these games. It's more about, can I survive long enough to maybe get my XP up to the red marker, up to the red space to unlock my super ability, and then I'm, really just going to wipe out the board.
Yeah, it did. That's a very good point. It did very much feel more to me like a pandemic style game where everything's just going sideways and you are having to survive and get through that. Less than those other games where it's like a story. You're going into an episode and like an adventure, if you will. This is less of an adventure and it's just another setting for all hell breaking loose.
That is what this is, yeah.
And you just trying to get through it. So if you like that, that's going to be a game for you. But I would say, like I said, if you're looking for more of that narrative and more of that flavor, Massive Darkness 2 and Death May Die might be a little bit more your ticket.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of more narrative dungeon crawlery games. When you look at the box, you might be tempted to think that this is going to be something like that this is going to be some kind of adventure game or some kind of dungeon crawler. It's not at all. I mean, it literally is kick open doors, fight everything that's in those rooms, waves and waves and waves of zombies coming at you. And they escalate. They get harder as you go to the point where you're putting like 10 or 12 minis down.
Yeah, there's
every round.
A lot more stuff that comes out. And I will admit, it is very cool when you get the superheroes coming out too, because as the zombie heroes, you're facing off with some of the heroes
non-zombie
that aren't yet zombies. And one thing we didn't touch on too, the back of the rulebook, you can play this as non-zombie heroes too against the zombies.
Flip it around and play the heroes versus the zombies.
I assume it's kind of the same, but just sort of
sort of you're rescuing
flip
bystanders
roles.
instead of devouring them and stuff like that.
But that was our experience having just played Marvel Zombies. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. We'll answer everything we can. And until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.